The rain hit Palermo like bullets that night, each drop exploding against the ancient cobblestones with a violence that seemed to mirror the city's dark heart. I pulled my worn coat tighter around myself as I hurried through the narrow streets of the old quarter, my nursing shift at San Giovanni Hospital having run 3 hours over because of an emergency in the ICU. My feet ached in my sensible shoes, the dampness seeping through the worn leather despite my attempts to avoid the deeper puddles. The scent of rain-soaked stone mixed with the lingering aroma of someone's late dinner, garlic and tomato sauce wafting from an apartment window above. I should have taken the main road, but exhaustion had me choosing the shortcut through the winding alleys I'd walked 1,000 times since moving to Palermo 2 years ago. The street lamps cast weak yellow circles in the darkness, their light barely penetrating the sheets of rain. Water dripped from the balconies overhead, creating a steady percussion that would have been soothing in other circumstances. My mind was still replaying the night's traumas, the elderly woman who'd coded twice before we finally stabilized her, the young man with the motorcycle accident, the endless documentation that followed every crisis. The sound of an engine roaring too fast for these narrow streets made me look up. Headlights swept around the corner ahead, their beams cutting through the rain like searchlights. I pressed myself against the wet stone wall, expecting the car to pass. That's when I saw him. A small figure, no more than 6 years old, stood frozen in the middle of the street. The child wore expensive clothes, I could tell even from a distance. Dark trousers and a button-down shirt that was plastered to his small frame by the rain. His dark hair was matted against his head, and in the split second before everything happened, I saw his face. Pale, terrified, his eyes wide with the particular fear children have when they know something is terribly wrong. The car wasn't slowing. The driver either hadn't seen the boy or didn't care. Time contracted into that strange, slow-motion state I'd experienced in the ER during the worst emergencies. My legs moved before my brain fully processed the decision. I dropped my bag, heard my phone clatter against the stones, and ran. The distance seemed impossible, the car too fast, the child too frozen. My hands connected with his small shoulders just as the car's bumper would have. I shoved him with all my strength toward the opposite wall, feeling his body lift and fly those crucial few feet to safety. The car's side mirror caught my hip, spinning me sideways. I hit the cobblestones hard, the impact driving the air from my lungs, pain exploding through my right side. The car screeched to a halt, its tires shrieking against the wet stone. I lay there for a moment, gasping, my vision swimming with rain and pain. Then training kicked in. The child. I had to check the child. I pushed myself up on shaking arms, ignoring the protests of my battered body, and looked for the boy. He was huddled against the wall where I'd thrown him, staring at me with enormous dark eyes. Tears streaked his face, mixing with the rain. But he appeared unharmed. "Are you hurt?" I called to him in Italian, my accent still marked with the northern dialect I'd grown up speaking, so different from the Sicilian that surrounded me here. Before he could answer, I heard footsteps running toward us. Multiple people, their shoes splashing through puddles with urgent speed. The car's doors had opened, and men were emerging, their silhouettes dark and imposing in the rain. I struggled to my feet, positioning myself between them and the child, my nurse's instinct to protect overriding any concern for my own safety. "Step away from the boy." The voice was cold, authoritative, carrying an accent that marked its owner as pure Sicilian. The man who spoke stepped into the circle of lamplight, and I got my first clear look at what power looked like in human form. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a suit that somehow remained crisp despite the rain, as if the weather itself wouldn't dare to dishevel him. Dark hair was swept back from a face that could have been carved from Carrara marble, all sharp angles and aristocratic planes. But it was his eyes that made my breath catch, storm gray and cold as winter sea, fixed on me with an intensity that felt like physical pressure. "He's not hurt," I managed, my voice steadier than I expected. "But he needs to be checked properly. I'm a nurse. Let me examine him." The man's eyes narrowed slightly, the only indication of surprise at my resistance. He moved closer, and I could smell his cologne now, something expensive with notes of bergamot and cedar, completely at odds with the rain-soaked street. Other men flanked him. I counted 4, all built like soldiers, all watching me with the same calculating assessment. "Matteo," the man said, his voice softening fractionally as he looked past me to the child. "Vieni qui, figlio mio." The boy, Matteo, scrambled up and ran, not to the imposing man, but to me, wrapping his small arms around my wet legs with a grip that spoke of absolute terror. I felt his small body trembling against mine, and my hand automatically went to his head, a comforting gesture I'd performed countless times with frightened children in the hospital. The man's expression changed then, something dangerous flashing in those gray eyes. "Step away from my son," he repeated, but this time there was a thread of something more complex in his voice. Not just command, but urgency, perhaps even fear. "Your son was standing in the middle of the street," I said, my protective instincts for the child overriding my growing awareness that I was in a very dangerous situation. That car would have killed him. "Where were you?" The silence that followed my words was profound, broken only by the drumming rain. The men around the gray-eyed man tensed, hands moving toward their jackets in movements that made my heart race. I'd seen enough crime dramas to know what those gestures meant. "Do you know who I am?" the man asked, his voice deadly quiet. "Should I?" I countered, though my knees were shaking. The adrenaline from the rescue was fading, leaving pain and fear in its wake. One of the other men stepped forward, speaking rapid Sicilian dialect that I could barely follow, something about respect and consequences. The gray-eyed man silenced him with a single gesture, never taking his eyes off me. "I am Luca Santoro," he said, pronouncing each syllable with precise clarity, as if the name itself should make me fall to my knees. When I simply stared at him blankly, something almost like amusement flickered across his face. "You truly don't know." "Should I?" I asked again, my grip tightening on Matteo as the boy pressed closer to me. Luca Santoro studied me for a long moment, rain dripping from his hair, his suit finally beginning to show the effects of the weather. "You saved my son's life," he said finally. "That creates a debt. In my world, such debts are taken very seriously." "I don't want anything," I said quickly. "I'm just glad he's safe. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to get home and change into dry clothes." I tried to step around him, gently urging Matteo toward his father, but the boy clung to me with renewed desperation. "Non voglio," he whimpered. "Per favore, signora, non lasciarmi. Please don't leave me." The words pierced through my professional detachment straight into the soft part of me that had made me choose nursing in the first place. I looked down at his upturned face, so young, so frightened, and felt my resolve waver. "It's okay," I murmured to him in Italian, crouching down despite the pain in my hip to meet his eyes. "Your papa is here now. You're safe." But Matteo shook his head violently, his small fingers digging into my wet coat. "She stays," Luca said suddenly, making a decision that would change the course of my life. "Until Matteo calms down, she stays." Before I could protest, one of his men had retrieved my bag from where I'd dropped it. Another was opening the door of the car that had nearly killed the child. Luca's hand settled on my shoulder, not roughly, but with unmistakable authority. "I insist," he said, and there was no request in those words. "You'll come to my home, get dry, be compensated for your heroism. It's the least I can do." The smart thing would have been to refuse, to recognize the danger in accepting anything from a man whose name apparently should have struck fear into me. But Matteo was still clinging to me, and now that the adrenaline was truly fading, I could feel how badly I was shaking, how much my body ached from the impact with the street. "Just until he's calm," I heard myself say. "Then I go home." Luca's smile was slight, barely a curve of his lips, but it held a knowledge that made my stomach tighten with apprehension. "Of course," he agreed, "just until he's calm." As I was guided into the car, Matteo scrambling into my lap despite his father's presence, I caught sight of my reflection in the rain-streaked window. A bedraggled woman with wild eyes, holding a child she didn't know, sitting beside a man whose power radiated from him like heat from flame. I looked like someone who had just made a terrible mistake. The car pulled away from that rain-soaked street, leaving behind only puddles and the echo of screeching tires. I had no way of knowing that the woman who would return to that neighborhood would be forever changed from the one who left it. That in saving one life, I had bound myself to a world where life and death were merely tools in a much larger game. Matteo's small hand found mine in the darkness of the car, his fingers intertwining with mine with a trust I hadn't earned but had somehow been granted. Across from us, Luca Santoro watched with those cold gray eyes, and I wondered what he saw when he looked at me. A foolish woman who had stumbled into his world, a threat to be neutralized, or something else entirely, something that made his jaw tighten and his hands flex against his thighs. The rain continued to fall on Palermo, washing the streets clean of everything but secrets and blood. And I, Elena Rossi, nurse and stranger to this dark world, was being carried deeper into both with each passing moment. Luca Santoro's home was not what I had expected, though I wasn't entirely sure what I had expected. A fortress, perhaps. Something brutal and obvious in its display of power. Instead, the car wound up narrow roads into the hills overlooking Palermo, passing through gates that opened silently at our approach, until we arrived at a villa that looked like it had grown from the Sicilian landscape itself. Ancient stone walls rose 3 stories, softened by climbing jasmine, whose scent cut through even the heavy rain. Windows glowed with warm amber light, and the entrance was framed by columns that spoke of centuries past. It was beautiful in a way that made my chest ache, the kind of beauty that reminded you of everything you'd never have, never belong to. Matteo had fallen asleep against me during the drive, his small body finally relaxing after the terror of his near death. I felt the steady rhythm of his breathing against my side, his damp hair tickling my neck. My clothes were still soaked through, my hip throbbing where the car had hit me, but I didn't want to disturb him. Some instinct told me that this child didn't feel safe very often, and that his trust was a precious, fragile thing. "Bring him inside," Luca said, his voice cutting through my thoughts. He had been silent during the drive, speaking only in low tones to the man in the front seat, words too quick and dialect heavy for me to follow. Now he opened the car door himself, gesturing for me to exit. I shifted carefully, trying not to wake Matteo, but his eyes fluttered open as we moved. "Signora Elena," he murmured, using my name, though I had no memory of telling him. Perhaps he'd heard it somewhere in the chaos, or perhaps his father had learned it already. The thought that Luca Santoro had been gathering information about me during our short drive made my skin prickle. "I'm here," I said softly, adjusting my hold on him as I climbed from the car. The rain had lessened to a drizzle, but the air was thick with moisture and the scent of wet earth and flowers. The villa's interior matched its exterior in unexpected elegance. Marble floors, centuries old by the wear patterns visible even in the lamplight. Frescoed ceilings depicting scenes from mythology, gods and mortals intertwined in eternal drama. Furniture that looked like it belonged in museums, not homes. And everywhere, that same attention to detail, fresh flowers in antique vases, books in Italian and other languages I couldn't identify. Artwork that even my untrained eye recognized as significant. A woman appeared from somewhere deeper in the house, elderly, dressed in black, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. She took in the scene with sharp, dark eyes, her gaze moving from Luca to me to Matteo, missing nothing. "Signora Russo will show you to a room where you can change," Luca said, speaking to me but looking at the woman. "Matteo's clothes as well. Then we'll talk." It wasn't a request. I was beginning to understand that Luca Santoro didn't make requests. He stated facts and expected the world to arrange itself accordingly. Normally, that kind of arrogance would have sparked my temper. But I was too tired, too sore, and too aware that I was completely out of my depth here. Signora Russo led me up a sweeping staircase to the second floor, Matteo still in my arms, though he was certainly heavy enough that my muscles protested. She opened a door to a bedroom that was larger than my entire apartment, decorated in creams and golds, with a bathroom visible through another doorway. "For you," she said, in heavily accented Italian, gesturing to the wardrobe. "Clothes. The boy's room is next door. I will take him." But when she reached for Matteo, he clung to me again, his face pressing into my shoulder. "Non voglio," he said again, those same words from the street. "I don't want to." Signora Russo's expression softened almost imperceptibly. She looked at me with something that might have been sympathy, or might have been warning. "He does not trust easy," she said quietly. "His mama, she died when he was 3. He remembers nothing but absence." My heart contracted. 3 years old. The same age when children need their mothers most, when the world is still too big and too frightening to face alone. I looked down at Matteo's dark head, at the way his small fingers gripped my wet coat, and felt something protective and fierce unfold in my chest. "Can I keep him with me while I change?" I asked. "Just in the bathroom. He doesn't have to look. I think he needs to know I'm not disappearing." Signora Russo studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Don Luca will want to speak with you soon. Do not keep him waiting long." Don Luca. The title sent a chill through me. I had lived in Palermo long enough to understand what that meant, what it implied about the man who had brought me to his home. The hospital was neutral ground, treating everyone regardless of their affiliations, but we heard things. Whispered names, families who controlled territories and businesses through means the law couldn't touch. I had been careful to stay ignorant, to focus on my work and my small, quiet life. That ignorance had died tonight on a rain-soaked street. I carried Matteo into the bathroom, which was almost as large as the bedroom, all marble and gold fixtures that gleamed in the soft light. I set him on a cushioned bench near the door, keeping up a steady stream of gentle words while I peeled off my wet clothes. The wardrobe held more than I expected, not just one outfit, but several, and in exactly my size. More than that, they were things I would have chosen myself if I'd had the money. Simple, practical, well-made. Someone had known my measurements, my taste before I'd even arrived at this villa. The realization made my hands shake as I pulled on soft wool trousers and a cashmere sweater that felt like clouds against my chilled skin. Luca Santoro had known I would come here tonight, had known enough about me to prepare for my arrival, which meant he'd been watching me for longer than just the minutes since I'd saved his son. "Why was your papa's car driving so fast?" I asked Matteo gently, as I found clothes for him too, small versions of what an adult might wear, pressed and perfect. "That's dangerous, especially in the rain." Matteo's face clouded. "It wasn't Papa's car," he said softly. "I ran away. I wanted to see Mama's grave. Papa says I'm not old enough, but I miss her. I snuck out. The car came when I was lost." My throat tightened. A 6-year-old boy, trying to reach his dead mother's grave alone in the rain, nearly killed for his grief. "Your papa must have been very worried when he found you gone," I said, helping him into dry clothes. "Papa is always worried," Matteo said with the matter-of-fact tone children use for immutable truths. "He doesn't let me go anywhere, doesn't let me do anything. There are always men watching. Always. He looked up at me with those enormous dark eyes. Except you. You weren't watching before. You just helped. The distinction he made broke something in me. This child had been so surrounded by surveillance that a simple act of human kindness stood out as remarkable. What kind of life was that for anyone, let alone a 6-year-old boy? When we emerged from the bedroom, Signora Russo was waiting in the hallway. "Don Luca is in his study," she said. "I will take you." "Can Matteo stay with me?" I asked, feeling the boy's hand slip into mine. She hesitated, then nodded. "He will ask for it anyway." Don Luca does not refuse the boy often. We followed her through hallways lined with more artwork, more evidence of wealth and taste accumulated over generations. The villa was quiet, except for our footsteps and the distant sound of voices from somewhere below. Men's voices, speaking in rapid dialect about things I couldn't parse. The study was a room of leather and dark wood, bookshelves reaching to the ceiling, a massive desk positioned before windows that must offer spectacular views in daylight. Now, with night and rain beyond the glass, they only reflected the room back at us. Luca stood with his back to the door, looking out at those reflections, a glass of something amber in his hand. He turned when we entered. He'd changed too, out of his wet suit into dark trousers and a white shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms roped with lean muscle. His hair was damp, slicked back from his face in a way that emphasized those sharp cheekbones, that unforgiving jaw. "Matteo," he said, and his voice carried such a complex weight of emotion, relief, anger, fear, love, that I suddenly understood this man was capable of feeling everything he appeared too cold to feel. He just kept it locked away where the world couldn't use it against him. "Why did you leave the house?" Matteo's hand tightened in mine, but he answered, his voice small but steady. "I wanted to see Mama." Something crossed Luca's face, pain stark and undeniable before his mask slipped back into place. "Not alone," he said, his voice rough. "Never alone. Do you understand? The world is dangerous, figlio mio. Tonight proved that." "Signora Elena saved me," Matteo said, as if this solved all problems. "She can take me next time." I opened my mouth to protest, to explain that there couldn't be a next time, that I needed to go home, back to my own life. But Luca spoke first, his eyes fixing on me with that same intensity from the street. "Yes," he said slowly. "Perhaps she can." He moved closer, his footsteps silent on the thick rug. "Elena Rossi, 28 years old, nurse at San Giovanni Hospital, emergency department. You came to Palermo 2 years ago from Trento, leaving no forwarding address with family or friends. You live alone in a rented apartment in the Zisa district. No boyfriend, no close relationships, no social media presence. You work. You go home. You work again. A ghost living among the living." Each fact he recited made my breath come shorter. He didn't just know surface details. He knew things that would require digging, investigating. "Why do you know these things about me?" I demanded, finding my voice even as fear clawed at my throat. "Because in the 3 seconds it took you to save my son's life, you became important to me," Luca said simply. "And I make it my business to know everything about important people." "I'm not important. I'm nobody." "You're the woman my son is currently holding like a lifeline," Luca countered, gesturing to where Matteo still gripped my hand. "The woman who risked her own life without hesitation for a child she'd never met. That makes you either remarkably stupid or remarkably good. I needed to know which." "And?" I challenged, anger beginning to burn through my fear. A slight smile curved his lips, not reaching his eyes. "I haven't decided yet." He gestured to a chair near the fireplace where flames crackled cheerfully, at odds with the tension in the room. "Sit. We need to discuss the situation." I sat, Matteo immediately climbing into my lap as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Luca's jaw tightened at the sight, but he said nothing, taking the chair across from us. "You saved Matteo tonight," he began. "In my world, that creates an obligation, a debt that must be repaid. I don't want repayment. I just want to go home. Where rivals of mine can find you." Luca's voice was soft, deadly. "Where the men who were driving that car tonight can identify you and use you to get to me." My blood ran cold. That wasn't an accident. The car that nearly hit him. "The Calabria family has been testing my patience for months," Luca said, his tone conversational, as if discussing the weather rather than attempted murder. "They saw an opportunity tonight when Matteo slipped his guards. They failed, but now they know about you. They'll assume you're important to me, to Matteo. They'll use that assumption." "But I'm not," I protested weakly. "I'm nobody to you." Luca leaned forward, his gray eyes boring into mine. "You became somebody the moment my son decided you were worth holding on to. Whether you like it or not, Elena Rossi, you're now part of this world. The only question is whether you survive it." The words hung in the air between us, a promise and a threat wrapped into one. Outside, the rain had stopped, but I could hear water still dripping from the eaves, a steady rhythm like a clock counting down to something inevitable. "What do you want from me?" I whispered, my arms tightening around Matteo, who had fallen asleep again, exhausted by fear and relief. Luca's expression softened almost imperceptibly as he looked at his sleeping son. "Stay," he said simply. "Here, where I can protect you. Where Matteo can have—" He paused, something vulnerable flickering in his eyes. "Whatever it is you give him that he so desperately needs. I have a job, a life. I'll handle your job. The hospital administrator is, let's say, agreeable to my requests. You'll be on extended leave, paid, with a position waiting when this is over. If it's ever over," I thought, but didn't say. "And if I refuse?" Luca stood, moving to the window, his back to me once more. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, almost gentle. "Then I'll have you watched every moment of every day, guards you'll never see, but who will shadow your every movement. You'll live your life in a cage just the same, but a cage where I can't control all the variables, where I can't ensure your safety." He turned, his face illuminated by firelight. "Or you can stay here, comfortable, safe, and perhaps help a boy who has too few reasons to smile learn to trust the world again." It was manipulation, of course. Every word calculated to appeal to my protective instincts, my nursing nature. But as I looked down at Matteo's peaceful face, so different from the terrified child on the street, I felt my resistance crumbling. "How long?" I asked. "Until I've eliminated the threat. A few weeks, perhaps. A month or two at most." A lie. I could see it in the tension around his eyes, the way his fingers flexed against his thigh. This would be longer than weeks or months. This would be for as long as Matteo needed me, and perhaps longer still. "I need to call someone," I said. "Let them know I'm all right." "No calls, not yet. I can't risk them being traced, used to find you." More control, more isolation. I should have been terrified. Part of me was. But another part, the part that had chosen nursing because I needed to fix broken things. That part looked at this dangerous man and his wounded son and saw something I understood. A family fractured by loss, bound by love and fear in equal measure, trying to survive in a world that wanted to tear them apart. "One condition," I said, surprising myself. "You tell me the truth. About why Matteo is really so important. About what this world actually is. No more half answers and implications. If I'm risking my life by being here, I deserve to know why." Luca studied me for a long moment, then nodded once, sharp and decisive. Agreed. But not tonight. Tonight you rest. Tomorrow, I'll show you exactly what you've walked into. Signora Russo appeared in the doorway as if summoned, ready to lead me to whatever room had been prepared. I stood carefully, Matteo a warm weight in my arms, and followed her out. But at the door, I looked back at Luca, still standing by the window, his silhouette dark against the glow of the city below. "Why me?" I asked. "Why trust me with him?" Luca turned, and for just a moment, his mask fell away completely. I saw exhaustion there, bone deep and ancient, grief that had carved channels in his soul, and something else, something that looked almost like hope. "Because you're the first person in 3 years that my son has trusted," he said simply. "And if Matteo trusts you, then so must I." As I was led away to a bedroom far from the one where I'd changed, I understood that I had just agreed to something far more complex than temporary protection. I had become part of the Santoro family, whether I wanted to or not. And in this world, family was everything. Loyalty was absolute, and betrayal meant death. The bed was soft when I laid Matteo down. When Signora Russo insisted he sleep in my room tonight, his own room down the hall prepared but unused. He curled into the pillows, still sleeping, and I sat beside him, my hand resting on his small back, feeling each breath. Through the window, I could see Palermo spread below, beautiful and deadly in the darkness. Somewhere in that city was my apartment, my job, my simple life. It felt impossibly far away now, like something I'd dreamed rather than lived. The door to my room had no lock. I'd checked. Not that it mattered. I was as much a prisoner here as if there had been bars on the windows. The difference was that my cage was gilded, beautiful, and held a 6-year-old boy who needed me in ways his father couldn't even articulate. I laid down beside Matteo, listening to his quiet breathing, and wondered what the morning would bring. What truths Luca Santoro would reveal. What price I would ultimately pay for one moment of instinctive heroism on a rain-soaked street. Outside, I heard the sound of cars arriving, voices carrying in the night. Luca's world, continuing its dark business while I lay in its heart, protected and imprisoned in equal measure. Sleep was a long time coming, and when it finally did, my dreams were full of storm-gray eyes and small hands holding on for dear life, and the terrible understanding that I had just crossed a line from which there was no return. Morning came too early, sunlight streaming through windows I hadn't thought to cover. Matteo was already awake, sitting up in bed, watching me with those solemn dark eyes. For a moment, I'd forgotten where I was, reaching instinctively for my phone to check the time before remembering it had been left behind on that street, water-damaged and useless. "Buongiorno," Matteo said softly, his voice carrying the tentative hope of a child who wasn't sure if the previous night's kindness would survive into daylight. "Good morning," I replied, sitting up and immediately regretting it as my body reminded me of yesterday's impact. My hip was a spectacular bruise. I could feel it even without looking, and my shoulder ached from where I'd hit the cobblestones. "You're hurt," Matteo observed, his small face creasing with concern. "Because of me." "I'm fine," I assured him quickly, though moving sent protests through multiple muscle groups. "Just a little sore, nothing serious." A knock at the door interrupted us. Signora Russo entered with a tray of breakfast, espresso, fresh bread, butter, jam, and fruit cut into precise pieces. The coffee's aroma alone was enough to make me feel marginally more human. "Don Luca wishes to see you after breakfast," she said, setting the tray on a table near the window. "I will watch Matteo." But Matteo shook his head, scrambling across the bed to grab my hand. "I want to stay with Signora Elena." Signora Russo's lips thinned, but she nodded. "Then both of you will come when you've eaten." The breakfast was simple, but perfect, the bread still warm, the butter rich and creamy. Matteo ate with the focused intensity of childhood, getting jam on his fingers and not caring. I found myself smiling at him. This serious little boy with his father's eyes and his dead mother's absence written in every careful movement. "What was your mama like?" I asked gently, and immediately regretted it when his face fell. But he answered, his voice soft. "I don't remember her face anymore. Sometimes I think I do. But Papa says I'm remembering photographs, not her. I remember she smelled like flowers, and she sang. All the time she sang." His eyes filled with tears he bravely didn't let fall. "I want to remember more, but I can't. Does that make me bad?" "Oh, sweetheart, no." I pulled him into my lap, careful of my bruised hip. "You were so little when she died. It's not your fault that memories fade. But the important things, like how she made you feel safe and loved, those don't go away. They become part of who you are." He was quiet for a moment, then. "Do you have a mama?" "I do. She lives far away in the north. We don't talk much anymore." An understatement. We hadn't spoken in 2 years, since I'd left Trento and my former life behind. Why not? How to explain to a 6-year-old the complexity of family disappointment, of choosing a different path than the one laid out for you? "Sometimes adults have disagreements that are hard to fix," I said carefully. "It doesn't mean we don't love each other. It just means we need space." Matteo seemed to accept this, returning to his breakfast with the philosophical resilience of children. But I saw the gears turning in his small head, processing, comparing his loss to mine, trying to understand a world where parents and children could be separated by choice as well as death. When we'd finished eating, Signora Russo returned to escort us through the villa. In daylight, it was even more impressive, every detail speaking of generations of wealth and taste. We descended the main staircase, Matteo's hand in mine, and I felt eyes on us from shadows I couldn't quite see. Guards, I realized. Luca's men, watching, always watching. The study looked different in morning light, less menacing, though Luca's presence behind his desk did nothing to diminish the sense of power that radiated from the room. He was already dressed for the day in another impeccably tailored suit, this one charcoal gray, his hair perfectly styled, his expression unreadable. "Matteo, go with Signora Russo to your lessons," he said without preamble. Matteo's grip on my hand tightened. "I want to stay with Signora Elena. You will see her after lessons. Now go." The authority in his voice brooked no argument. Matteo looked up at me, seeking permission or reassurance, and I nodded gently. "I'll be here when you're done," I promised. "I'm not going anywhere." The look Luca gave me at those words was sharp, assessing, as if testing whether I meant them. Matteo reluctantly let go of my hand and followed Signora Russo out, dragging his feet in protest. When the door closed behind them, Luca gestured to the chair I'd occupied the previous night. "Sit. We have much to discuss." I sat, less comfortable now in daylight, more aware of how vulnerable I was in this place. "You promised me the truth," I said, keeping my voice steady. "And you'll have it." He poured coffee from a silver pot, passing me a cup before taking his own seat. "But first, tell me what you think you know about me. About my family." I wrapped my hands around the warm cup, gathering my thoughts. "The name Santoro is known in Palermo, one of the old families. There are whispers about your business dealings, though nothing that reaches the official channels. You're called Don, which suggests a certain position of authority." I met his eyes. "And men who are called Don usually have connections that the law either can't or won't touch." A diplomatic answer. There was dry amusement in his voice. "Let me be less diplomatic. My family has controlled certain interests in Sicily for 4 generations. What began as protection of our neighborhood during the chaos after the war evolved into something larger, more complex. He sipped his coffee, his gaze never leaving mine. We provide services the government cannot or will not. We protect those who pay for protection. We settle disputes that would otherwise end in violence. We maintain order in a world that would be chaos without us. The Mafia, I said flatly. Such an ugly word. So American. His smile was cold. But yes, if you want to use that word, then yes. I am what people call a mafia boss, the head of the Santoro family. And that makes Matteo, his voice softened fractionally, the heir to everything I've built. I set down my coffee cup with shaking hands. I'd suspected, of course, but having it confirmed so bluntly was different. And his mother? Luca's expression went blank, but I could see the muscle in his jaw tighten. Chiara was... He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. She was not born to this world. She was a lawyer, young, idealistic, who took a case defending one of my men. I attended the trial. She was brilliant, fierce, completely unafraid. He stood, moving to the window. I courted her properly, showed her only the legitimate sides of my business. When we married, I thought I could keep her separate from the darkness, give her and our son a normal life. What happened? I asked quietly, though I already knew the answer would be tragic. The Calabria family happened, he said, his voice devoid of emotion in the way of men who feel too much. They wanted to weaken me, to prove I could be touched. They sent a car bomb meant for me. Chiara was driving Matteo to his play school. She saw the device, managed to get Matteo out before. He stopped, his hand clenching into a fist against the window frame. She died saving him, just as you did last night. The parallel was clear, painful. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. That's an unbearable loss. He was 3, Luca continued, as if I hadn't spoken. Old enough to understand his mother was gone, too young to understand why. He stopped speaking for 6 months. When he finally did, he was different, quieter, more careful, as if he'd learned that loving anything meant risking losing it. Until last night, I observed, when he grabbed onto me like I was the first solid thing he'd touched in 3 years. Luca turned, his eyes finding mine with that unsettling intensity. Yes, until last night. Which brings us to why you're really here. I waited, my heart beating faster. I need someone Matteo can trust who isn't part of this world, Luca said bluntly. Someone who won't be corrupted by it, who won't see him as a future Don, but as simply a boy who needs kindness. My men are loyal, but they're soldiers. Signora Russo cares for him, but she's been with my family too long, seen too much. She can't give him what he needs. And what does he need? Normalcy, softness, the kind of maternal care he's been missing. Luca moved closer, his gaze never wavering. You're a nurse. You care for people instinctively, and for reasons I don't fully understand, my son has decided you're safe. That you're, he paused, worth holding on to. You want me to be some kind of nanny? I asked, trying to understand. I want you to be whatever Matteo needs you to be. And in exchange, I'll pay you more than you'd make in 10 years at the hospital. I'll ensure your safety. And when the time comes that you want to leave, I'll make certain you can do so without fear of retaliation from my enemies. It was a bargain with the devil, dressed in reasonable terms. And if I say no, then I'll still protect you, because you saved my son, and that debt is absolute. But Matteo will lose the one person who's made him smile in 3 years. And you'll spend every day wondering if the Calabria family has found you, if every stranger on the street is a threat, if every moment might be your last. He was right, and we both knew it. My old life was gone the moment I'd pushed Matteo to safety. The only question was whether I'd acknowledge that truth or fight against it uselessly. "I want to go to my apartment," I said. "Get my things. Close that chapter properly." "Already done. Your belongings are being packed as we speak and will arrive here this afternoon." At my sharp look, he continued, "I told you, Elena, I can't risk you being exposed, but I'll have photographs brought to you, let you verify everything important is included." More control, more decisions made for me. I should have been furious, but I was too tired to fight what seemed inevitable. What would my days look like? "You'd wake with Matteo, share breakfast with him. While he has lessons, you'd be free to do as you wish within the villa and grounds. Afternoons would be yours to spend with him however you see fit. Evenings, after his bedtime." Luca's voice took on a different quality. "You'd dine with me. I'd like to know the woman my son has chosen to trust." There was something in the way he said it that made my pulse quicken. Not quite flirtation, but an acknowledgement of attraction that sat heavy in the air between us. "I'm not her," I said quietly. "I'm not your dead wife. I can't replace her." "I know." His voice was rough. "I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to be yourself. The woman who didn't hesitate to risk her life for a stranger's child. That's what Matteo needs. That's what—" He stopped himself. "That's what this family needs." I stood, needing distance, moving to the window where he'd stood earlier. The villa's grounds were extensive, I could see now. Gardens and paths leading down toward the cliff's edge. Beautiful, isolated, safe. A prison, yes, but a comfortable one. "I want Sundays off," I said, my mind already accepting even as my heart rebelled. "One day a week where I can leave, go to the city, remember who I am outside these walls. With guards. Obviously with guards. I'm not stupid." I turned to face him. "But I need to know I'm still a person, not just—" I gestured vaguely. "Whatever this is." "Agreed. Anything else?" "I want to call the hospital myself. Explain that I need leave, in my own words." He nodded slowly, supervised on a secure line. "But yes. And if I decide I can't do this, if it becomes too much, you let me go. No threats, no coercion, just freedom." This time, his pause was longer. Finally, "If you leave, the protection goes with you, permanently. That's the best I can offer. I can't have you walking away with knowledge of my family and no guarantee of your silence." It was as much freedom as I'd get in this situation. "Then I agree. For Matteo's sake, I'll stay. For now." Something in Luca's expression shifted. Tension I hadn't realized he'd been carrying releasing from his shoulders. "Thank you." The simple sincerity of it caught me off guard. This was a man unaccustomed to thanking anyone, to asking for anything. That he'd done both told me how desperately he wanted this for his son. "When do I start?" "You already have. As far as Matteo's concerned, you're staying because you want to, not because you have to. Let him believe that." "It's not entirely a lie," I admitted. "I do want to help him, but I'd like to help him in circumstances where I wasn't essentially a captive." "A protected guest," Luca corrected with the ghost of a smile. "The distinction matters. Only to you." We stood there in charged silence, the truth of the situation settling between us like dust after an explosion. I was bound to this place now, to this family, by debts and danger and a little boy's desperate need for something soft in his hard world. "I should check on Matteo," I said finally, needing to escape the intensity of Luca's gaze. "He'll be in lessons for another hour. But yes, feel free to explore the villa. Learn your new home." He returned to his desk, dismissing me with the casual assumption of authority. "We'll dine at 8 this evening. Dress is formal." Of course it was. because even in a prison, appearances mattered. I left his study, closing the door behind me, and leaned against the wall in the hallway, trying to catch my breath. This was my life now, at least for the foreseeable future. Playing nanny to a mafia boss's son, living in luxury that felt like chains, bound by debt and danger to a man whose eyes held storms and whose world was built on violence I could only begin to imagine. And the most terrifying part? A small, traitorous part of me was already wondering what Luca Santoro would look like across a dinner table, candlelight softening those hard features, wondering what stories he'd tell about his world, what truths he'd reveal, wondering if the real danger wasn't the enemies outside these walls, but the attraction building inside them. The weeks that followed established a rhythm I hadn't expected. Mornings with Matteo became my favorite time, watching him slowly emerge from his shell like a butterfly testing new wings. He'd wake earlier each day, seeking me out with questions about everything. Where was I from? What was nursing like? Did I have siblings? Did I like dinosaurs? The last question came with such earnest hope that I immediately researched dinosaurs online and could soon name at least 15 species by sight, much to his delight. His lessons were conducted by a series of tutors who came and went with military precision. Mathematics, Italian literature, English, even French. Luca was preparing his son for a world that required multiple languages and quick thinking. I sat in sometimes, when Matteo asked, and watched this serious little boy absorb information like a sponge, his intelligence sharp and focused in a way that reminded me painfully of his father. The afternoons were ours. I'd take Matteo into the gardens, where spring was beginning to show in early blooms. We'd walk the grounds, always within sight of the villa, always watched by guards I tried to ignore. He told me about his mother in these moments, fragments of memory mixed with stories he'd been told, trying to piece together a woman he could barely recall. "Papa doesn't like to talk about her," he confided one afternoon as we sat by a fountain, its water cascading in musical tones. "It makes him sad. But I need to know about her. Is that wrong?" "No, sweetheart. That's completely normal." I adjusted his jacket against the cool breeze. "Grief is complicated. Your papa loved your mama very much. Sometimes love hurts more after someone's gone, and talking about them makes the hurt feel fresh again. Do you think he'll ever stop being sad?" I thought about Luca, about the man I'd observed over dinners that had become increasingly personal. He'd kept his promise to tell me about his world, explaining the intricate hierarchy of families, the codes that govern behavior, the brutal justice meted out to those who broke the rules. But he'd also revealed glimpses of the man beneath the dawn. His love of art, particularly Renaissance paintings, his surprising knowledge of poetry, the way his voice softened when he spoke of his own father, dead 5 years now, who'd built this empire from nothing. "I think," I said carefully, "he'll always carry the sadness. But maybe he can learn to carry happiness alongside it. People are big enough to hold both." Matteo considered this with the solemnity that made him seem far older than 6. "Since you came, he smiles more. Small smiles, but still. I notice. I'd notice too. Those dinners at 8 had evolved from formal interrogations to something else entirely. Luca would ask about my day with Matteo, and I'd find myself telling stories that made him laugh, actual laughter that transformed his harsh features into something almost boyish. Then he'd share pieces of his own day, carefully edited versions that nonetheless gave me insight into the massive operation he controlled. "He likes you," Matteo added, watching me with those 2 observant eyes. "He looks at you the way he looked at Mama in the photographs, before she died." My breath caught. "Matteo, that's not... I'm just here to help you." "But you like him too, I can tell." Out of the mouths of babes. I did like Luca, far more than was wise. He was dangerous, yes, and his world was built on violence I couldn't condone. but he was also fiercely protective of those he loved, intelligent, surprisingly funny when he let his guard down. And there was something magnetic about him. The way he commanded every space he entered. The intensity of his focus when it landed on you. The dinners had become the highlight of my days, though I'd never admit it aloud. We'd sit across from each other at a table too large for two, courses appearing and disappearing courtesy of invisible staff. The conversations ranged from philosophy to politics, to the simple pleasures of good wine and excellent food. "You're softening him," Signora Russo had commented one morning, her tone unreadable. "In 30 years of service to this family, I've never seen Don Luca so—" She paused, searching for the word. "Unguarded." "Be careful, child. Men like him don't love easily. But when they do, it consumes everything." Her warning lingered as I watched Matteo chase butterflies through the garden, his laughter carrying on the breeze. Was I falling for Luca Santoro? The answer terrified me because it was increasingly yes. Each dinner brought new revelations, new facets of a man far more complex than the cold mafia boss I'd first met. That evening's dinner started typically enough. I dressed in one of the many outfits that had appeared in my closet, this one a deep emerald dress that hugged my figure without being ostentatious. Luca's eyes had widened slightly when I entered the dining room, a flash of appreciation he didn't try to hide. "Elena," he greeted me, rising to pull out my chair. "You look beautiful." "Thank you." I sat, hyper-aware of his proximity as he pushed in my chair, his fingers brushing my bare shoulders in a touch that lingered a second too long. Wine was poured, the first course served. We talked of Matteo's progress, how his nightmares had decreased, how he'd laughed at breakfast over a silly joke. Luca's expression softened as I described his son's growing confidence. "You've done more for him in a month than all the child psychologists I hired over 3 years, he said quietly. "He needed someone like you. Someone kind." "I think he just needed someone who wasn't afraid to let him be sad sometimes," I replied. "All the professionals probably tried to fix him. But grief isn't something to fix. It's something to carry. You speak from experience." It wasn't a question. Over these dinners, I'd revealed pieces of my own past, the family I'd left behind, the expectations I'd failed to meet, the loneliness of building a life entirely alone. Luca listened to all of it without judgment, his attention absolute. "I lost someone too," I admitted. "Not a parent or spouse, a patient, a little girl, just 7 years old, leukemia. I'd been her nurse for 2 years, through all the treatments, all the hope and disappointment. When she died, something in me broke. I couldn't." I paused, struggling with the memory. I couldn't save her, couldn't fix it. And I realized I'd been trying to fix things my whole life, trying to be what my family wanted, what the world expected. So I ran, came here, started over. Luca reached across the table, his hand covering mine. The touch was electric, sending warmth through me. "You can't save everyone, Elena. But you saved Matteo, and in doing so," his grip tightened slightly, "you saved me." Our eyes met, held. The air between us felt charged, heavy with unspoken desires and impossible complications. He was my employer, my protector, my captor all at once. Getting involved with him would be supremely stupid, crossing a line that shouldn't be crossed. And yet... "Luca," I started, not sure what I was going to say. The door to the dining room burst open. One of Luca's men, Salvatore, I'd learned his name, stood there, his face pale. "Don Luca. Urgent news." Luca's demeanor changed instantly, the softness vanishing beneath cold authority. "What is it?" "The Calabria family. They've made a move, took out 3 of our men at the port. And..." Salvatore's gaze flicked to me, uncertain. "They sent a message. They know about her, about the woman with Matteo that night." Ice flooded my veins. Luca stood, his movements controlled, but I could see the tension coiling through him. Increase security immediately. No one enters or leaves the grounds without my explicit permission. And Elena... He turned to me, his eyes holding apology and determination in equal measure. I'm sorry, but your Sunday freedoms are suspended. It's too dangerous. What does this mean? I asked, though I already knew. It means the Calabria family sees you as leverage, as a way to hurt me through Matteo. His jaw clenched. I won't let that happen. But it also means you're more trapped here than ever. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd been feeling almost comfortable in my golden cage, even beginning to think of it as home. Now the bars were visible again, reinforced and locked tight. What about Matteo? I asked, my mind going immediately to the little boy sleeping upstairs. He's safe here. This villa is a fortress, but we need to be more careful. No more garden walks where you're visible from beyond the walls. No more tutors coming in. We'll do lessons internally. Luca moved toward the door, then paused. Elena, I know this isn't what you signed up for. If you want to leave, truly leave. I'll arrange maximum security transport to anywhere in the world. You'd never be truly safe, but I'd do everything in my power. I'm not leaving Matteo, I interrupted, surprising myself with the vehemence. Not now. He needs stability, not another person abandoning him. Something fierce and possessive flashed in Luca's eyes. You're remarkable. Do you know that? He left before I could respond, Salvatore trailing him. I sat alone in the dining room, my appetite gone, my mind racing. This was the reality of Luca's world. Violence, danger, constant threats. And I'd just committed to staying in the center of it. Not for Luca, I told myself. For Matteo. Only for Matteo. But as I climbed the stairs to check on the sleeping child, I knew I was lying. Some part of me was staying for the man with storm-gray eyes who looked at me like I was the first sunrise after endless night. The dangerous, damaged man who'd somehow found his way into my heart, despite all my defenses. Matteo was sleeping peacefully, his small face relaxed in dreams. I sat beside his bed, watching him breathe, and made a silent promise. Whatever came, I'd keep him safe, even if it meant staying in this world forever. Even if it meant losing my own heart to his father in the process. Outside, I heard the sounds of men mobilizing, of security increasing. The fortress closing ranks against the darkness beyond. And somewhere in that darkness, enemies plotted and planned, seeing me as weakness when I'd never felt more determined to be strong. For Matteo, for Luca, for this strange, dangerous family I'd somehow become part of. Tomorrow, the real battle would begin. Tonight, I'd hold vigil over this sleeping child and pray that love would be enough to keep us all safe. Even though I knew, in this world, love was often the most dangerous thing of all. 2 months after the Calabria threat intensified, life in the villa had taken on a different quality. Security was omnipresent but invisible. Guards I'd learned to recognize by sight, if not name. Matteo had adapted with the resilience of childhood, accepting the new restrictions as if they'd always existed. But I could see the strain in his eyes sometimes, the longing to run freely through the gardens, to explore beyond the walls. Luca had changed too. The dinners continued, but they'd grown more intense, charged with an attraction we both acknowledged but couldn't act on. Not while I was essentially his employee, his son's caretaker, a woman under his protection. The power dynamics were too skewed, too complicated, or so I kept telling myself when I'd catch him watching me with hunger barely concealed, when I'd feel my body respond to his proximity with a yearning that kept me awake at night. It was a Thursday afternoon when everything shifted. I was in the library with Matteo, reading him a story about knights and dragons, when Signora Russo entered, her face grave. Don Luca needs to see you, immediately. I'll watch the boy. My stomach dropped. Nothing good ever came from urgent summons. I kissed the top of Matteo's head, promised I'd be back, and followed her to Luca's study. He was there with Salvatore and 2 other men I didn't recognize, their faces hard with the kind of tension that preceded violence. "Elena." Luca's voice was tight. "We have a situation." "What kind of situation?" He gestured to a laptop open on his desk, turned so I could see the screen. It showed a grainy photograph, clearly taken from a distance. A woman with blonde hair, my height, my build, walking in a city street I recognized as downtown Palermo. "That's not me," I said, confused. "I haven't left the villa in months." "We know, but the Calabria family doesn't. They think they've located you." Luca's eyes were dark with something I couldn't quite name. "They're planning to take this woman tonight, use her as leverage to draw me out. So tell them it's not me. Problem solved." "It's not that simple. The woman is an innocent. She just happens to look like you. If we do nothing, they'll discover their mistake eventually and kill her. But if we intervene, we show that we know about their plans, that we have sources inside their operation." He paused. "It could trigger a full-scale war. And if we don't intervene, an innocent woman dies." I looked at the photograph again, at this stranger whose only crime was resembling me. "We have to save her." "We?" Luca's eyebrow raised. "This is my world, Elena, my problem to solve. She's in danger because of me, because I saved Matteo. That makes it my responsibility too." "Absolutely not. You're not going anywhere near this situation." I straightened, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Then tell me, Luca, how do you plan to extract her without the Calabria family realizing something's wrong?" He was quiet, and I could see the calculation in his eyes. Whatever plan he'd been formulating, it clearly had complications. "The grab is happening at 7 p.m., Salvatore interjected. "Outside the Cafe Bellini, near the Quattro Canti. She goes there every Thursday after work. They'll take her on her walk home." An idea was forming, dangerous, but potentially effective. What if they did grab me? Or rather, someone they think is me? "No." Luca's voice was flat. "Absolutely not. Hear me out. You intercept the actual woman before she leaves her office. Send her somewhere safe. I take her place, wearing similar clothes, walking the same route. When they grab me, your men follow. You get their location, extract me, and strike before they realize their mistake." "You're suggesting using yourself as bait." Luca's voice was dangerously quiet. "To save a stranger?" "Yes." "No." "Why not?" "You have the resources, the men. The risk is minimal if managed properly." Luca stood abruptly, his chair scraping back. "The risk is your life. Do you understand that? These are not men who play games. If something goes wrong, if we don't reach you in time, then you'll have failed. But isn't that risk present anyway? The Calabria family thinks I'm important to you. They'll keep looking for me. This way, we control the situation, and we save an innocent life." The men in the room watched our exchange with fascination, probably unused to seeing anyone argue with Don Luca so bluntly. "There's another factor," Salvatore said carefully. "If we pull this off, if we turn their trap into ours, we could finally locate their headquarters, end this threat permanently." Luca turned on him. "You're not helping." "But he's right," I pressed. "This could be the opportunity you need to protect Matteo, to make him truly safe. Isn't that worth the risk?" For a long moment, Luca simply stared at me, emotions warring across his face. Fury, fear, and something that looked like desperation. "If I agree to this," he said finally, "and that's a significant if, you do exactly what I say. Every instruction, followed precisely. No heroics, no improvisation." "Agreed." And after this is over, his eyes held mine. We're having a very different conversation about your role in this family. My heart skipped. What do you mean? You know exactly what I mean. The air between us crackled with tension. Salvatore cleared his throat, reminding us we had an audience. The next few hours were a blur of preparation. The actual target was intercepted, confused but cooperative when Luca's men explained she was in danger. I was dressed in clothes matching those in the surveillance photos, a wig adjusting my hair color slightly, just enough alteration that close examination would reveal the switch, but distant observation would be fooled. Luca personally fitted me with a tracking device, his fingers gentle against my skin as he secured it beneath my clothes. I'll be a block away the entire time, he murmured. The moment they take you, we move. I trust you. His hand cupped my face, thumb brushing my cheekbone. After this, Elena, after this, I'm done pretending. I didn't have time to ask what he meant. The operation was in motion. The walk to Cafe Bellini felt surreal, like moving through a dream. I could feel eyes on me, both Luca's men and the Calabria family watchers. The street was busy with evening pedestrians, normal people living normal lives, unaware of the violence about to unfold around them. It happened at the corner, just as predicted. A van pulled up, side door sliding open. Strong hands grabbed me, pulling me inside before I could even think to scream. A cloth covered my face, chemical sweet, and darkness took me. I woke to the smell of mold and engine oil. We were in some kind of warehouse, my hands bound, my head aching from whatever they'd used to knock me out. 2 men stood guard, speaking in low Sicilian dialect. Fear was immediate and visceral. This was real. I was truly in danger. But I forced myself to breathe slowly, to remember that Luca knew where I was, that help was coming. She's awake, one of the guards said. An older man entered, his face marked with scars, his eyes cold. So you're the whore who's been warming Santoro's bed, he said in Italian. Pretty enough, I suppose. Let's see how pretty you are after we're done. He reached for me, and I did what Luca had instructed. I screamed. Loud and long, the sound echoing through the warehouse, which is when all hell broke loose. The warehouse doors exploded inward. Gunfire erupted, quick and precise. The Calabria men went down before they could react. And then Luca was there, his face a mask of fury as he cut my bonds, gathered me into his arms. Are you hurt? Did they touch you? His hands were frantic, checking for injuries. I'm fine, just scared. You were magnificent. He kissed my forehead, my cheeks, stopping just before my lips. And we're leaving. Now. The ride back to the villa was tense, Luca holding me against him in the back seat, his heart hammering against my ear. Salvatore drove, reporting that the Calabria leadership had been neutralized, their network exposed and dismantled. It was over. After months of threats, the danger had passed. Back at the villa, Luca didn't release me until we were in his study. The door closed against the world. Then he framed my face with both hands, his eyes searching mine. Never again, he said roughly. Never again do you put yourself at risk like that. It worked. That woman is safe. Matteo is safe. And you nearly gave me a heart attack. His forehead pressed against mine. Do you have any idea what you mean to me? What I felt when I saw that man touching you? Luca, I love you. The words were raw, torn from somewhere deep. I've loved you since you argued with me in that rain-soaked street, since you looked at my son and saw a child instead of an heir, since you sat across from me at dinner and made me remember what it was to want something beyond power and revenge. My breath caught. I'm just a nurse. You're everything. He kissed me then, a kiss full of desperation and relief and love too long denied. I melted into it, into him, all my resistance dissolving. When we finally parted, both breathing hard, he kept me close. "Marry me," I laughed, slightly hysterical. "That's not a proposal. That's an order." "Then I'm asking, Elena Rossi, will you marry me? Will you be my wife, Matteo's mother, the light in our darkness?" I should have hesitated, should have considered all the complications, the dangers, the impossibilities. Instead, I thought of Matteo's smile, of dinners filled with conversation, of this man who'd shown me strength and vulnerability in equal measure. Yes, his kiss this time was different, gentler, full of promise. When we emerged from the study hours later, Matteo was waiting, tired, but insistent on seeing us. Luca lifted him into his arms. "Elena has agreed to stay with us forever," he told his son. "If that's all right with you." Matteo's face lit up with joy so pure it made my eyes sting with tears. "She'll be my mama?" "If you'll have me," I said softly. His answer was to launch himself into my arms, holding on with that same desperation from the first night. But this time, it wasn't fear. It was love. We stayed like that, the three of us, a family forged in violence but bound by something stronger. Love, trust, the promise of better days ahead. Though I knew Luca's world would never be truly safe, that danger would always lurk at the edges. But I'd learned something in these months. Sometimes the most dangerous thing was love itself. And sometimes it was worth every risk. 3 years had passed since that night in the warehouse, transforming everything while somehow keeping what mattered most unchanged. Matteo was 9 now, taller, more confident, but still the same thoughtful boy who'd grabbed my hand in the rain. The nightmares had stopped entirely. His laughter came easily. And when he called me Mama, which he'd been doing since our wedding, my heart still swelled with love so fierce it sometimes scared me. The wedding itself had been small, private, just family. Luca's sister had flown in from Milan, tearful and joyous to see her brother happy again. Signora Russo had cried openly, something I'd thought impossible from the stern woman. And Matteo had been our ring-bearer, his face solemn with the importance of his role, until the moment Luca kissed me and he'd cheered so loudly the priest had laughed. That first year of marriage had been an adjustment. Learning to navigate Luca's world not as an outsider or employee, but as his partner. He'd been careful to shield me from the worst of it, but I was no longer naive. I understood what he did, what necessary evils he committed to maintain order in chaos. It didn't make me love him less. If anything, understanding the weight he carried made me love him more. We'd established our own rhythms. Mornings with Matteo, helping him dress, sharing breakfast, walking him to his lessons, which were now conducted by tutors who lived on the grounds, carefully vetted for safety. Afternoons varied, sometimes spent with Matteo, sometimes managing the charitable foundation Luca had created in my name, funneling money from his less savory enterprises into community programs and scholarships. And evenings, after Matteo slept, belonged to us. To dinners that now ended in our shared bed, to conversations that ranged from the philosophical to the mundane, to the physical expression of love that never dimmed, but only grew deeper with time. But something had been building in Luca over the past months. A restlessness, a weariness that went beyond physical tiredness. I'd catch him staring out windows, his expression distant, as if weighing something heavy in his mind. It came to a head on a Sunday afternoon. We were in the garden, Matteo teaching me Italian curse words he'd somehow learned, much to my amusement and Luca's horror, when Luca's phone rang. The conversation was brief, tense, and when he hung up, his face was grim. "I need to handle something," he said, kissing my forehead. "I'll be back before dinner." But dinner came and went, and Luca didn't return. Matteo grew anxious, picking at his food, asking questions I couldn't answer. By the time I put him to bed, worry was gnawing at my stomach. This wasn't unusual. Luca's business sometimes kept him out late. But tonight felt different. Heavier. He returned near midnight, his suit jacket missing, his shirt partially unbuttoned. There was blood on his sleeve, not his own by the casual way he moved. He found me in our bedroom, waiting. "I'm sorry," he said, moving to the bathroom to wash. "It took longer than expected." "What happened?" He was quiet for a long moment, water running over his hands. When he spoke, his voice was flat. "A family was trying to muscle in on our territory. We had to remind them why that's a mistake. People died tonight. Yes, I'd learned over 3 years that interrogating him about such things only pushed him away. Instead, I simply went to him, wrapped my arms around him from behind, and held on. I'm tired, Elena," he said quietly. "So tired of this life. The violence, the constant vigilance, the knowledge that Matteo will inherit this burden when I'm gone. Then don't pass it to him. You have a brother. You're second in command." Paolo has been running most operations for a year now, but fully stepping away. He turned in my arms, his eyes searching mine. "That's not simple. Men in my position don't retire. They die or they get killed. There's no peaceful exit." "Make one." I gripped his face between my hands. "You've built this empire, transformed it from what your father created into something more sustainable. Name Paolo as your successor. Stay on as an advisor if you must, but give yourself freedom. Give us freedom." "And do what?" But I could see the hunger in his eyes, the desperate want to believe it was possible. "Live," I said simply. "Travel with your wife and son. Watch Matteo grow up without fear." "Maybe," I paused, nervous about sharing this news I'd only confirmed that morning. "Maybe be present for a second child." Luca froze. "You're pregnant, about 6 weeks. I wanted to be sure before telling you." He dropped to his knees, his hands spanning my still flat stomach, his forehead pressing against it. "A baby," he whispered. "Our baby. So give them a different life than the one you've lived. You've paid your debts to your father's legacy. Now live for your own." The decision wasn't immediate. Over the following weeks, Luca met with his advisors, with Paolo, with the heads of allied families. The transition was complex, requiring delicate negotiations and guarantees. But slowly, miraculously, it came together. 6 months later, on Matteo's 9th birthday, Luca made the formal announcement. Paolo would assume control of the Santoro family operations. Luca would remain as consigliere, advisor and counselor, but would no longer be directly involved in daily operations. It was unprecedented, a boss stepping back while still alive. Some in the organization grumbled. A few old-timers predicted disaster. But Paolo was strong, smart, and had been groomed for leadership. And more importantly, he had Luca's blessing and continued guidance. The freedom was intoxicating. We traveled, first within Italy, then beyond. Showed Matteo the world outside Sicily's borders. Visited my family in Trento, a reunion that was awkward but healing. My mother cried when she saw me pregnant, when she realized I was truly happy despite the unconventional path I'd chosen. The villa became a home rather than a fortress. Security remained. It always would. But it was subtler, less oppressive. Matteo had friends now, carefully selected children of allied families who could be trusted. He played soccer, learned to paint, discovered a love for astronomy that had him begging for a telescope. And through it all, Luca transformed. The hardness that had defined him softened. He smiled more, laughed easier. Spent hours with Matteo, teaching him not about running a criminal empire, but about art and music and philosophy. showed him that there was a world beyond violence, beyond the darkness he'd been born into. I gave birth to our daughter, Chiara, on a warm October evening. Luca held my hand through every contraction, tears streaming down his face when he heard her first cry. We'd named her for his first wife, honoring the woman whose death had led to life, whose son had brought us together. Matteo was besotted with his little sister, careful and gentle in a way that made my heart ache. He'd hold her for hours, singing the same lullabies I'd once sung to comfort him. The circle of healing, completing itself. One evening, 2 years after Luca had stepped back, we sat on the terrace overlooking Palermo. The city glittered below, beautiful and dangerous as always. Matteo was putting Chiara to bed, insisting it was his turn to read the bedtime story. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked Luca, nestled against his side. "Leaving that life behind?" "Never." He pressed a kiss to my temple. "I lost everything I valued once. Nearly lost it again trying to hold on to power. But you taught me that real strength isn't control. It's letting go. Trusting others to carry burdens you once thought only you could bear. Paolo's doing well. Better than well. The family is more prosperous, more stable than when I ran it. Turns out I was right to step back." "You're still advising him." "Twice a week, on matters that actually need my experience. But the daily operations, the violence, the constant vigilance, that's his now." He turned to face me fully. "I'm just a husband and father now, best role I've ever had. You're biased. Absolutely." He kissed me, slow and sweet. "But I'm also right." From inside the villa, we heard Chiara's delighted giggle, followed by Matteo's deeper laugh. 2 children, safe and happy, growing up in the shadow of a dark empire, but not consumed by it. "I never told you," Luca said softly, "what I saw that night in the rain, when you saved Matteo." "What did you see?" "The future. Just for a moment, I saw who you'd become to us, to him, to me." His hand found mine, fingers intertwining. "I saw home, and I'd been homeless for so long, Elena, living in this villa surrounded by family, but alone in every way that mattered. Then you appeared, this stubborn woman who argued with me, defied me, loved my son without hesitation or condition. And suddenly, I wasn't alone anymore. You gave me a home too," I said, emotions thick in my throat. "I was running from everything, trying to escape failure and disappointment and pain. But you showed me that home isn't a place. It's people. It's love. It's choosing every day to stay, even when leaving might be easier." It was never going to be easy with me. "No," I agreed, "but it was always going to be worth it." Matteo appeared on the terrace, Chiara in his arms, her small face sleepy. "She wanted to say goodnight to you both," he said, passing her to Luca with practiced care. We stood there, the 4 of us, looking out over Palermo as the last light faded from the sky. A family forged in the most unlikely circumstances, bound by love that had survived danger and darkness. "Tell me again," Matteo said, as he had so many times before, "how you and Mama met." Luca smiled, Chiara curling against his chest. "Well, it was a rainy night, and a very foolish little boy decided to run away." "I wasn't foolish," Matteo protested, laughing. "I was brave." "Bravely foolish," I corrected. "But it worked out, didn't it?" "Because you saved me." Matteo's voice was soft, serious. "Both of you saved me. You saved Papa from his sadness, and he saved you from loneliness. And now we're a family." "Now we're a family," Luca echoed, his arm pulling me close. "Forever." As we stood there, Palermo spreading below us like a carpet of stars, I thought about that night 3 years ago. How one moment of instinct, One choice to help a stranger's child had led to this. To love and family, and a life I never could have imagined. The rain had washed away my old life that night, leaving me standing in the wreckage with a terrified child in my arms and a dangerous man watching us both. I'd thought I was trapped. I'd been wrong. I'd been freed. From expectations, from loneliness, from the prison of a life half-lived. Luca had given me family. Matteo had given me purpose. Chiara had given me joy. And I, in turn, had given them the one thing they'd lost when Chiara the First died. Hope. The belief that love could survive darkness, that family could be rebuilt, that happiness wasn't a dream but a choice made daily. "Come on," I said, herding everyone toward the door. "It's getting cold. Let's go inside." Inside, where warmth and light and love waited, where our story would continue to unfold, day by day, choice by choice. Not perfect, never perfect, but real and true, and ours. The little girl who died in my care would never know how her loss had pushed me toward this life. But I thought she'd approve. She'd always told me I was meant for bigger things than hospital shifts and lonely apartments. She'd been right. I'd been meant for this. For Matteo's laughter and Luca's love, and Chiara's sleepy cuddles. For mornings in the garden and evenings on the terrace, and nights in the arms of a man who'd seen my scars and loved me not despite them, but because of everything they represented. A life saved, a family found, a love that conquered even the darkness of the Sicilian underworld. And it had all started with rain and courage and a child who trusted a stranger to protect him. The best decisions, I'd learned, were rarely planned. They were instinctive, terrifying leaps into unknown waters. I'd jumped that night on a rain-soaked street, and I'd landed here, in arms that would hold me forever, in a family that would never let me go. Home. Finally, home.